Uh-oh. Today I'm walking north on the ridgeway, and my dog is on the lead and sniffing around. But this is not formally designated as Grimm's Ditch, but the ancient path where it connects to the ridgeway goes pretty much due east, and this is north, and the path that 3,000 years ago someone would have walked would have inevitably led them through this section here, because this is the nearest path to the ford of Wallingford. So later on I'll show you some of the landscape that emerges into. But so this is certainly connected to ancient paths, although it's not strictly speaking the Grimm's Ditch. Now, but again, it comes up to a little community up here called Newnham, and that also has a little church, but it also has this sort of open meadow landscape down to the Thames, and it's absolutely stunning, and again a very precious little corner of England. But we're going to go in just briefly here to this little chapel that again goes back to, well, from memory, the 1200s. So it's quite old, and it's still in use, and it's kind of in use certainly as a burial ground. There's lots of where local people have put their dead to rest, and again it is just absolutely stunning, and very old, and it's got a history and different parts to it, which I might share a little bit. But I'm always taken with walking through a churchyard like this, because the stones are here, and these are, as you can see, not tended graves. We'll do a little circle here first, and again another ancient yew tree. But so, oh, there's a good stave. I might be able to turn that into a longbow if I come here and help clear that one dark evening. But sort of under this ancient yew tree, you can see that these are ancient stones, and of course we're only ever remembered by one, maximum 2 generations. So I remember my grandparents, but of course I don't remember their parents, because I never met them, and likewise I'll be remembered by my children, and maybe, God willing, their children. So my grave will be hopefully tended somewhere, but then slowly, over just one generation, it'll fall into forgotten, and turn into something where we know that there were people here, and they had significant lives, and they had drama and hardship and courage and bravery and love, and we're all going to be dead for a very, very long time. And it kind of is a reminder, I always think, for myself, it's a reminder of how short our lives are. And like I say, I remember my grandfather well. He was a Swedish man that did well by his family, and I'll probably talk about that in future videos. But one thing that is relevant was that he had a brother that emigrated to America and ended up living in New York, and just going into this little church here of St. Mary in Newnham Murren, and it still remains a consecrated building, which is lovely. And It's that one there, and there is the history, which I shall probably paraphrase in subsequent edits of this video. So this church has been here for 800 years. The bones of this church are old. The original church is really quite old, and it's very, very charming, and it's lived through civil wars and all the historical changes of our landscape, and has all of these little details. And I love in particular this little charming feature where they made a hole. I'll give you a better angle here. They made a hole in the wall so that the congregation sitting here could participate in the service and see the vicar. And it is just quite remarkable. And I love my little dog. So bored with coming into churches, bless her. Yeah, it is quite spectacular, and it has a lovely feeling in it, with this light, with this little frame of a pillar and its little altar, and again always taken by the roofs that were crafted with skill and care in a way that is just lovely. So this little church for me marks a very, very special point on Grimm's Ditch, because the idea that this structure, this church is so old, over 800 years old, yet when it was built at that time, Grimm's Ditch was already 2,000 years old. So this is a modern structure in the context of people walking across the landscape here from place A to place B, and that kind of sets a stage somehow for the scale of our lives, and today on this talk I'm talking about NASA and the moon landings, which is something that happened only 60 years ago, and so that in itself is kind of just a mere footnote in our human history, and this church is something that has been here for so long, yet human beings have been here for 2 or 3 times the age of this church, which then is something that make you think. For 800 years, people have gathered in this church to celebrate being a human being, to share their faith, to come together as a community once a week, and this is the thing that we're losing now. Because there's a war on congregations, there's a war on communities, there's a war on families, there's a war on everything that fundamentally makes us a human being. There was a sense that they aspired to something higher. There was a weekly reminder that your life was not just your life, and that we don't work on the Sabbath, but instead we come here and meet up with the community and give just a little bit of our time to God and Spirit. And when I say that there was an aspiration for truth, I think that there was a notion that we should speak the truth, and there was a notion that it mattered. And of course, what I'm going to talk about today is NASA, NASA, the American body that is in charge of space exploration and moon landings. And why would I want to talk about NASA? Why would I want to make my Grimm's Ditch episode today about NASA? Well, if you remember, the premise for this series is what is waking people up? What is causing cognitive dissonance in people? What is causing people to go, that's weird? What is waking people up? And NASA has to be one of the things that is waking up more people than anywhere else, because as Elon Musk says, it looks so fake it has to be real. But in the case of NASA, my conclusion is that they are as fake as anything can be fake. And I will expand and explain on that from my own personal observations. There are plenty of channels and there are plenty of resources out there that will share much more of this than I can credibly do, because I'm certainly not a NASA scholar. But I've been around, and God gave me eyes with which to see, and a brain with which to think. And I just want to briefly turn the camera around to show you where I am here, because this is the meadows, and just down there, just beyond, in front of that building in the distance, that's the Thames. And these meadows here are inhabited by cows, and I keep a fairly careful eye out for them, because they get quite enthusiastic about checking out my dog. But NASA. So I was born in 1960, and I grew up in Canada. My parents divorced in 1967, and I ended up in Sweden living with my father, and my mother was still in Canada. And God, was it in 1967, 68? I'll have to check that, and I'll put up the correct year on the screen here. But she was a long distance mother, if you like, and she would send me, and we would write, and she would send me presents and things. And she sent me a picture in full Technicolor, full colour, of the Earth as viewed from space. And this was a precious possession of mine for many years, and then eventually it started to delaminate, and I no longer have it, sadly. And Rhoda, come here. And where I'm going to with all of this is, and if you're not down this rabbit hole, I ask you to suspend disbelief and do your own research, and not reject me out of hand. But it feels and it seems that we never went to the moon at all, and the whole thing is bewildering in its, I don't know, the audacity of the lie is so extraordinary. I don't even know how to begin. But back in the early 60s, there was a race for narrative supremacy with Russia, and it all turned into who was going to put a man on the moon, and who's going to put a man on the moon first. And America set out to win that race. And so we had the different Apollo missions, one after the other. Russia did some Sputnik stuff, and the global population is left with this truism that at least we put a man on the moon, but we didn't. You need to scratch the surface of this, and you need to go online and look for resources and credible sites. And it's kind of a bit incredible how the misinformation there is burying the online resources. And if you go on YouTube and do searches for meaningful terms, you'll come up with controlled opposition, you'll come up with misinformation, you'll come up with people who are trying to diminish and confuse and confuddle the story, because one of the greatest lies ever told was that we went to the moon. You will be familiar with Stanley Kubrick, the film director who created, together with Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, The Space Odyssey, who created some phenomenal films. And he was also charged with creating a filmic narrative for the moon missions. And according to conspiracy theorists who've spent big chunks of their life researching this, he left clues, not least of which was the jumper that the young protagonist of The Shining wears in the film, and quite amusing. But there is loads of evidence for how the moon landings were fake. And I don't know, I'm a simple man. I look at it from the perspective of being a carpenter and a joiner. Come on, brother! Come on, jump, jump! And there is an awful lot of debunking that's gone on online, and there's kind of a steady stream of conspiracy theorists that as soon as they get deplatformed, as soon as their stuff gets moved or deleted, they put it up again. And that whole community is alive and well, and I suggest that you look into it. But some of the things that struck me was a flag that waved in Moon's non-existing wind. Some of the things that stand out to me were how they were able to film the giant leap of mankind, despite the fact that he was supposedly the first one to set foot on the moon ground. There is, if you have any form of engineering training, and if you look at the surviving models or actual replicas of the moon landings, especially the ones that never went, that were constructed but didn't actually go up to the moon, so this is the raw material as from the workshops of NASA. They are just a joke. They have no ability to shield the travelers, the astronauts, from radiation. They have the physics of putting them on the moon and then getting them off the moon and getting it down to Earth is just, even as a non-engineer, when you look at it, it is just silly that people haven't looked at it and come to the conclusion that actually that's a big psyop. What are the other extraordinary things? Capricorn 1 was a film that remarkably was allowed to be released that pretty much describes how the whole thing was fake in a fictional form that actually more and more as you learn about it looks like a documentary. And I'm laughing, but it's kind of serious. NASA have a budget, and the exact numbers escape me, but it's something on the order of $100 million per day. No, it's not that much, but it's an extraordinary number, and it's a number that has been aggregating since the 60s, over 70 years, 60 years at least, of budget that has been appropriated from the American people to support and substantiate a hoax. Now, that's kind of bad enough, and it's kind of insulting, and it begs the question for why. And when I say this is not, I'm not sort of talking about my opinion here, because I'm a nobody. I can't scientifically or from an engineering perspective credibly assault anything, but there are so many people that can, including people that were former employees of NASA. There are many breadcrumbs of the astronauts themselves not being able to substantiate their journey. The modern space exploration as it is now, with space stations and satellites and what have you, so much of it has been admitted to being filmed in water tanks. Oh yeah, that's how we train the people. Well, of course it is. And that's where they get the footage from, and you can see little air bubbles, what have you, on official NASA footage. And then if I go full circle back to my grandfather's brother, he supposedly worked on one of the Apollo missions, and I didn't know this man well, but I always remember that I have family that worked on the moon mission. And how could then the moon mission be a hoax? Well, what NASA employees have said, come on this way, is that the work is compartmentalized, and people are sincere, and people are very much on mission, and they believe in their cause of furthering the human boundaries of science and exploration, but they work in such narrow and tight silos that they have no overview. They have no way of kind of getting a holistic view of what's going on. So you do your little bit in your department and in your area, but the big pieces are lost. One of the most extraordinary things that you can find online is how one of the senior people of NASA says, yeah, we'd go back to the moon in a heartbeat, but unfortunately we've lost the technology. Huh? We've lost the technology? So the technology from 1967 that put a man on the moon has been irrevocably lost? Yeah. They have lost all of the telemetry data, the mission, the record of the mission, and it no longer exists because it got randomly deleted. Weird that. So much of the original supposed footage has been lost, and the whole thing is just a, I don't know, it's a what's the metaphor I'm looking for? The whole thing is you couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery any worse. No, that's totally the wrong metaphor, but you know what I mean. It's kind of just odd, and then you get into little anomalies. NASA is one of the largest purchasers of helium in America. Why would NASA need helium? Well, because most of the satellites are basically balloon missions. If you look at the trajectory of rockets that go up from Cape Canaveral, they go up in a trajectory that is incredibly shallow, and they send these rockets up in their multiple stage things, but they kind of go up and then they cut, then they come down, and the whole thing, once you see it, is fake, like you would not believe. Now, why would they lie about that? Well, I have ideas, but the interesting thing is, I don't think that they can sustain that lie much longer, because people are wisening up to this. And if you consider the psychology of a human species that was able to, in the 1960s, put a man on the moon, and then we never did that again. We didn't carry on with the exploration, and yet we carried on funding this body to the tune of billions of dollars. Billions. It carried on, and of course people say, yeah, but Dan, they couldn't have a conspiracy that was kept through and with so many people. How could that conspiracy last where in a world where if 2 people know a secret, they can keep it. If 3 people do, it's already out. Well, there is only a few people that see the entire picture, and the astronauts, I tell you now, they're not credible witnesses. So that's interesting. Why would they lie? Why would they deceive us? Well, it seems to me that they take delight in deceiving us. These are not people who are like you and I. These are people who, how shall I put it without sounding too biblical? These are people that enjoy the lie. These are people that feed off of the lie, and there's a narrative created that is imprisoning us all. And I know if you're a normie listening to this for the first time, that sounds incredibly hard to swallow. And so you would have walked down from Henley down Grim's Ditch, you would have hung a right and you would have walked along the Thames, and then you would have arrived at the ford to Wallingford. And today it's a rather magical bridge. I used to live here, and every time I drove over that bridge I always felt that it was a magic bridge, and now we're entering the town that time forgot. But this crossing place was of particular interest to William the Conqueror, and he gave rights and privileges to Wallingford, as did Cromwell, and allowed them a market town license, as I remember, and an extended curfew, as in they could carry on trading for longer than other towns in England. So Wallingford has this long sort of history, because a crossing place across the river is precious, because back in the day when you were walking or ox carting or doing what you did, getting across this river would have been beastly. And my dog loves it. She's down there in the water now. I can see the ripples in the water because she's splashing about. What is she doing? Prada, where are you? Oh, I thought that was her. No, she's over there under the tree. There she is. And yeah, one of my favourite places in the world this is, and very, very pleased to be able to share it with you. And we shall start walking back. Come on, brother, let's go. Yeah, come on. So the moon landings, the narrative is held together by chewing gum and sticky tape. And when you look at some of the moon landings, as I mentioned before, they also seem to be held together in a way that is just absolutely extraordinary. And if you then consider the Van Allen belts that NASA tells us up there, where the temperature goes up to very high temperatures, enough to melt aluminium, which largely is what the moon lander and the craft was made of, the whole thing just falls apart like a pack of cards. And don't take my word for it, just notionally accept that here's a crazy Swedish person walking on Grim's Ditch telling you that the moon landings were fake. Now, will you do something about that? Will you do your own independent research? And will you take on board the fact that there is not one genuine picture of the Earth that is not a CGI composite? If you look at some of the pictures that NASA have put out as pictures of the Earth, they are all different. The continent of Africa in one covers half the globe, and in another it's a much different size. North America the same, the colour keeps changing. The whole thing is just farcical, where it would be so easy for them to evidence it. The photography of the original moon mission, it shows no stars. From our atmospherically clad planet, if we look up on a clear night, we can see the Milky Way, we can see stars, but when our astronauts were on the moon, they saw no stars. The whole thing is just laughable, and most people watching this video will not do the research, because the lie is so damned big that accepting that it's a lie has an implication. The lie is that big that it's too uncomfortable for people to actually explore it, because it unravels their entire weave of narrative that is trapping them in something that is not correct. Now, it's hard, and we're only sort of 4 or 5 episodes in here, all told, and already, if you followed me from the beginning here, you would start to get a feeling that, what is going on here? If COVID wasn't right, if 9/11 wasn't right, if the moon landings weren't right, then what the hell is going on? And we still have another 14 episodes to do, I believe, and when you come with me on the rest of that journey, all I can promise you is that it will be wildly uncomfortable. But like what the apocalypse means is the unveiling. It'll unveil some truths that give you a ground to stand on. It gives you a bedrock. It gives you a foundation upon which you can make decisions and choices. But most people would rather stay asleep. Most people will argue for their slumber. Most people will take issue with you if you upset them and try to force them to think. It's not my game, it's up to you what you do with this. But my job, as I stand here, as I walk here in 2022, is to share. The moon landings are fake. NASA is fake. NASA has film studio equipment that rivals Disney. The astronauts are immortalized on Hollywood Boulevard's Hall of Fame, on that street, those little stars on the ground. The astronauts are there because they are probably the biggest actors of all time, and they were absolutely shit. They've been to the moon, they were interviewed, they had no joy because they were choking on the lie. They were choking on the enormity of what they found themselves doing. Every single one of them that supposedly put foot on the moon were Freemasons. And there's a very rare clip, I can't remember if it's Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin, who's asked the question by a girl, and he actually, in a moment of candor, says, "Yeah, darling, that's because we didn't go there." Look for that clip and that'll tell you something. So I just hope that you've enjoyed this little walk here. I want to turn the camera around and just give you a little of the Thames, because the river flows on. Eventually it goes down to London. If we'd walked on Grimsditch back in Neolithic times, we would have arrived at this little town on the other side of the banks there. And these meadows have been here for a long time, and so has human beings. and we are still here, and in 3,000 years from now we will still be here, but it will be different, I'm sure. So I thank you for your kind attention, and I shall just love you and leave you there.